Margaret Collins was a woman who had everything: a company with her name on the door, a driver who picked her up at 7 every morning, a wardrobe full of clothes she wore to rooms full of people who respected her. She had power. She had money. She had a reputation that walked into rooms before she did. But every Sunday morning, Margaret Collins drove herself. No driver, no assistant, just her black coat, and a small bunch of white flowers. Because every Sunday, she visited the only person who ever made her feel like a human being, instead of a business machine. Her son, Daniel. He died 2 years ago, 26 years old, a car accident on a rainy Tuesday night. And just like that, the one person who called her Mom instead of Ms. Collins was gone. The one person who hugged her without wanting something in return. Gone. She never talked about it at work. She never cried in public. Margaret Collins did not fall apart. That was not who she was. But at that grave, she did. Every single Sunday. And she thought she was always alone there. Until one morning, she wasn't. That particular Sunday was cold. The kind of cold that bites your nose and makes your eyes water before you even feel sad. Margaret walked down the familiar path between the graves, flowers in her hand, eyes already a little red before she even got there. And then she heard something. Crying. Not just any crying. It was a child. A little girl. Small, maybe 4 or 5 years old. Sitting right there in the grass, next to Daniel's grave. Just sitting there. Crying. Margaret stopped walking. She looked around. There was a woman nearby, kneeling, her hands pressed flat against the grass like she was trying to hold something down. She had dark hair, olive skin, and she was whispering something in Spanish. Her shoulders were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. Margaret didn't know what to do. She was not a go talk to strangers kind of person. She was a keep your head down and handle your own life kind of person. But the little girl looked up. Big dark eyes, wet cheeks, a tiny red coat, and something about those eyes made Margaret's feet moved before her brain could stop them. She walked over slowly and crouched down. "Hey," she said softly. "Are you okay?" The little girl just stared at her. Didn't say a word. The woman on the ground finally looked up too. Her eyes were swollen. Her face was a mess of grief. She quickly wiped her cheeks with her sleeve and said in a thick accent, "I am sorry. We will go? I am sorry." "No," Margaret said quickly. "Please don't. I wanted to make sure she was okay." The woman pulled the little girl close and held her. "She is fine. We are fine." But they were very clearly not fine. Margaret looked at Daniel's grave, then at the woman, then at the little girl again. She stayed. She didn't know why she stayed. She would ask herself that question 100 times later. But she sat down on the cold bench nearby, and she just stayed. After a few minutes, the woman spoke. "You come here every Sunday," the woman said quietly. It wasn't a question. Margaret looked at her. "You've seen me? We come every Sunday too." The woman looked at the grave next to Daniel's. Margaret had never really paid attention to it. She'd been so locked in her own grief, she hadn't noticed. The name on the stone said Marco Reyes, beloved husband and father. "Your husband?" Margaret asked. The woman nodded. 8 months ago. 8 months. That was still so fresh. That was still the bleeding part of grief. The part where you don't sleep. And you forget to eat, and every morning you wake up and for 1 second you forget. And then you remember. "I'm Margaret," she said. "Sophia," the woman said. And then she looked down at the little girl in her arms. "And this is Lucia." Lucia, the little girl with the big dark eyes and the red coat. She was looking at Margaret again, still quiet, but watching. The way small children watch people when they're trying to figure out if they're safe. Margaret reached into her coat pocket. She always kept a small wrapped candy there. A habit from when Daniel was small and she used to pick him up from school. She held it out to Lucia. Lucia looked at her mother. Sophia gave a small nod. And Lucia took the candy with both hands. The way children do when something feels precious. It was such a small moment. But Margaret felt something crack open inside her chest. They started talking. Slowly at first. The way two people talk when they don't know each other. But pain has already introduced them. Sophia was from Mexico. She'd come to the United States with her husband Marco 12 years ago. They had nothing when they arrived. Marco worked 3 jobs. Sophia cleaned houses. They saved. They built a small life. A small apartment. A small savings account. And Lucia, their miracle baby they had waited 7 years for. Then Marco got sick. A blood condition that moved fast and showed no mercy. Within 5 months, he was gone. And Sophia was alone, in a country that wasn't hers, with a daughter who kept asking where daddy was, and a visa that was tied to a job she could barely keep because she had no one to watch Lucia while she worked. Margaret listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer solutions. She just listened. And Sophia, maybe because she was desperate, maybe because something about Margaret felt safe, just talked. She talked and talked, like she'd been holding it all in for 8 months, and someone had finally opened a door. When she finally stopped, she laughed a little, embarrassed. I don't know why I tell you all this. You are a stranger. Grief does that, Margaret said. It makes you honest. Sophia looked at her. Who do you visit? Margaret looked at Daniel's grave. My son. Sophia pressed her hand to her heart. How long? 2 years. Does it get better? Margaret thought about it for a long time before she answered. Because she hated when people lied to her with kindness. She wanted to give Sophia the truth. It doesn't get smaller, she finally said. But you get bigger around it. Sophia looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly, like that was the answer she needed to hear. Not the pretty one. The real one. They said goodbye that day, and Margaret drove home. She sat in her living room for a long time, not watching TV, not answering emails. Just sitting. She kept thinking about Lucia's eyes. There was something she couldn't name. Something that pulled at the back of her mind like a thread she was afraid to pull. She thought about Daniel. Daniel had traveled. A lot. He was that kind of person, always moving, always going somewhere new. Before he died, he had spent almost a year in different countries. Mexico was one of them. She thought about the timeline Sophia had described. Marco getting sick. The dates. The years. She told herself she was being crazy. She told herself grief plays tricks on the mind. She went to bed, but she couldn't sleep. The next Sunday, Margaret came to the cemetery earlier than usual. Sophia and Lucia were already there. When Lucia saw her, she smiled. It was the first time Margaret had seen her smile, and it hit her like something physical, a wave of something warm and unbearable at the same time. She sat with them again. This time she brought hot chocolate in a thermos, 3 cups. She didn't know why she brought 3. Her hands had just done it without asking her brain. Lucia wrapped her little hands around the cup and looked at Margaret with those big eyes and said, very seriously, thank you. It was the first thing she had said to Margaret. Margaret had to look away because she felt the sting coming. They talked again, and this time Margaret asked something she hadn't asked before. Sophia, when Marco was sick, were you two together the whole time? Or were there periods where she stopped? She didn't know how to finish the sentence without sounding like she was accusing someone of something. Sophia looked at her carefully. What are you asking me? Margaret took a breath. I'm asking about Lucia. Long silence. Sophia looked down at Lucia, who was playing with a small toy in the grass, not paying attention. Marco could not have children, Sophia said quietly. He knew when we married. We tried everything. When Lucia came, he cried. He said she was God's gift. She paused. He never asked questions. He just loved her. Margaret's heart was pounding now. Sophia, my son Daniel. He traveled. He was in Mexico. He stayed there for almost a year, maybe 5, 6 years ago. Sophia looked up slowly. The air between them changed. He was kind, Margaret said carefully. Dark hair. Tall. He had a laugh that you could hear from across the room. Sophia's face had gone completely still. Sophia. I knew a Daniel, Sophia whispered. A long time ago. Before Marco proposed. It was a short time. He went back to America. We lost contact. She swallowed hard. I did not know I was pregnant until 2 months after he left. I tried to find him. I could not. Margaret couldn't speak. I named her Lucia because Marco said it meant light. Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper now. But her middle name is Daniela. The world went quiet. Margaret looked at Lucia playing in the grass. The dark hair. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking. The laugh she had heard once, just once. When Lucia had chased a butterfly across the path. That laugh. She knew that laugh. She had heard it for 26 years. She didn't cry right there. She waited until she got to her car. And then she completely fell apart. Both hands on the steering wheel, head down. Sobbing the way she hadn't sobbed since the night they called her to the hospital. Daniel was gone. But he had left something behind. A little girl with big dark eyes and a red coat who said thank you like it. Was the most important sentence in the world. A little girl named Daniela. The weeks that followed were not simple. Nothing about this was going to be simple. Margaret knew that. She didn't rush it. She didn't call her lawyers. She didn't make demands. That was the old Margaret. The boardroom Margaret. This Margaret showed up the next Sunday with more hot chocolate. And the Sunday after that. And the one after that. She and Sophia talked. Really talked. About Daniel. About the year he spent in Mexico. About the letters he used to write that Margaret still kept in a box in her closet. About the way he made everyone in a room feel like they were the most interesting person alive. Sophia cried when she heard those things. Not out of sadness, exactly. Out of recognition. Because she had known that version of Daniel too. Just for a short time. But she had known him. And slowly, carefully, like two people building something fragile out of broken pieces. They found a way to trust each other. Margaret didn't offer money first. She offered time. She asked if she could take Lucia to the park one afternoon. Sophia said yes. She asked if she could help Sophia find a better childcare arrangement so she could keep her job. Sophia, after a long pause, said yes. She showed up. Not with a checkbook. With her presence. With her time. The most expensive thing she had. And the one thing she had always given the least of. One evening, about 3 months after that first Sunday, they were sitting together at Sophia's small kitchen table. Lucia was asleep in the next room. There was tea. There was quiet. And Sophia said something that Margaret would never forget. You know, I was angry at God for a long time. Why Marco? Why us? We worked so hard. We did everything right. And still everything fell apart. Margaret wrapped her hands around her cup. But then I think, if Marco did not die, I do not come to that cemetery that Sunday. If Daniel did not die, you do not come to that cemetery that Sunday. And Lucia grows up without knowing any of this. Sophia shook her head slowly. I do not think God is cruel. I think he is just doing things in ways we cannot see yet. Margaret thought about it. All those Sundays. All that grief. All those mornings. She drove to that cemetery feeling like her. Life had lost its purpose. And the whole time, 30 feet away from her son's grave, his daughter was sitting in the grass, waiting, without knowing she was waiting. Lucia started calling her Nana about 6 weeks after the park visits began. Margaret did not ask her to. She did not suggest it. Lucia just did it one afternoon, pointed at her, and said, Nana, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Margaret had to sit down. She called her Nana for the rest of her life. 2 years later, Sophia and Lucia moved into a house, a real house, with a yard and a room that Lucia painted yellow because she said yellow was the happiest color. Margaret helped them find it. She did not buy it for them. She helped Sophia get stable enough, financially and emotionally, to buy it herself. Because Sophia was that kind of woman. She didn't want to be saved. She wanted to be steady. And Margaret went back to work every Monday with something she hadn't had in years. A reason, not just a company to run, not just a legacy to protect. A little girl who drew her pictures and left them on her desk. A child who had Daniel's laugh and Sophia's strength. A child who was a miracle disguised as a coincidence. Disguised as a Sunday morning at a cemetery. Here is what this story taught me. Grief is not the end. Sometimes, and I know this sounds impossible when you're in the middle of it, sometimes grief is the door. Margaret lost her son. She went to that cemetery every week to mourn. She never expected to find anything there except sadness. But that cemetery gave her back a piece of Daniel she didn't even know existed. The little girl who looked just like him. We spend so much time asking why things are taken from us. We almost never stop to ask what's being placed in front of us instead. That little girl was always there. Lucia was always 30 feet away. But Margaret had her head down, locked in her own pain, not seeing anything around her. It took one moment of looking up. One moment of choosing to walk toward a crying child instead of walking away. To change everything. That's all it takes sometimes. One moment of looking up. If you're carrying grief right now, if you've lost someone and the world feels permanently smaller, I'm not going to tell you it gets easy. Margaret didn't get easy. She got brave. She got brave enough to sit next to a stranger. Brave enough to ask the hard question. Brave enough to show up. Not with money, not with power, but just with herself. And that was enough. It was more than enough.